Dad, I'm sorry, but you're just too old for this." The words hung in the cold December air like frozen daggers. Walter Hayes stood on the marble steps of his son's mansion, snowflakes catching in his thinning white hair, holding a homemade apple pie that had taken him 3 hours to bake that morning. He was 78 years old, dressed in the same navy suit he'd worn to his wife's funeral 23 years ago. It still fit, though the shoulders hung a little looser now. He had polished his shoes until they gleamed. He had even bought a new tie, burgundy with tiny silver snowflakes, because he wanted to look nice for Christmas dinner with his only son. Marcus Hayes stood in the doorway of his Georgian colonial, backlit by the warm golden glow of crystal chandeliers. He was 45, tall and broad-shouldered, wearing a charcoal cashmere sweater that probably cost more than Walter's monthly pension. His dark hair was touched with distinguished gray at the temples. He looked every inch the successful real estate mogul he'd become, the man whose face appeared on billboards across 3 counties. "Buy your dream home with Marcus Hayes," they proclaimed. He looked nothing like the little boy who used to fall asleep in Walter's lap while they watched television in their tiny apartment above the laundromat. "I don't understand," Walter said softly, his breath forming white clouds in the frigid air. "You invited me 3 weeks ago. You said it was time we spent the holidays together again. You said Vivian was excited to finally have a real family Christmas." Marcus glanced over his shoulder into the house. Walter could hear the murmur of voices, the clink of expensive glassware, someone laughing at a joke he couldn't hear. He could smell roasted meat and fresh bread and something sweet and spiced. His stomach, which had held nothing but tea and toast all day, cramped with longing. "I know what I said," Marcus replied, his voice dropping lower. He stepped out onto the porch and pulled the door partially closed behind him. "Look, Dad, this is complicated. Vivian's parents are here. Her brother flew in from Connecticut with his wife. They're sophisticated people. They're used to a certain kind of atmosphere." "I brought pie," Walter said, lifting the dish slightly. His hands, gnarled with arthritis and spotted with age, trembled. "It's your mother's recipe. The one she always made for Christmas, apple with cinnamon and just a touch of nutmeg. You used to say it was your favorite." Something flickered across Marcus's face. Guilt, perhaps, or the ghost of a memory. But it was gone in an instant, replaced by the smooth, impenetrable expression of a man who made his living, convincing people to sign contracts they couldn't afford. "That's very thoughtful, Dad, but honestly, Vivian has hired a pastry chef. We have a dessert course planned. 7 different options. It's all very curated." "Curated," Walter repeated. The word tasted strange in his mouth. Marcus sighed, the sound sharp with impatience. "You have to understand. Tonight is important. These aren't just family. These are connections." Vivian's father sits on the board of 3 major development companies. Her brother is a partner at one of the biggest investment firms in the state. This dinner, it's about building relationships, building our future. "I'm your father," Walter said, and for the first time his voice cracked. "I'm your past, and I thought I was part of your future too." "You are, of course you are," Marcus said quickly, but his eyes slid away, focusing on something over Walter's shoulder. "It's just, tonight isn't the right fit. You wouldn't be comfortable. They're talking about market trends and international travel and, I don't know, wine appellations. You'd be bored out of your mind." The truth, when it finally came, was worse than the lies. "And honestly, Dad," Marcus said, his voice dropping to barely a whisper, you don't really fit the aesthetic we're going for. This is a very particular kind of evening. Everything has to be perfect. Vivian has been planning it for weeks. The decorations, the menu, the guest list. It's all very carefully orchestrated. And having you here with your stories about the post office and your polyester suits and your old-fashioned ideas, it would just throw everything off." Walter felt something inside him crumble. It was a physical sensation, like a building collapsing floor by floor, until nothing remained but dust and broken foundation. "Aesthetic," he said numbly. "I'm sorry," Marcus said, and he did sound sorry, in the abstract way someone sounds sorry about bad weather or traffic. "Maybe we can do lunch next week, somewhere casual. Just the 2 of us. I'll check my calendar and text you." He was already backing toward the door, already retreating into the warmth and light and carefully orchestrated perfection of his evening. Walter wanted to scream. He wanted to grab his son by those expensive cashmere shoulders and shake him until the boy he'd raised came back. But he was 78 years old and very, very tired. "Merry Christmas, Marcus," he said quietly. "Merry Christmas, Dad," Marcus replied. He hesitated for just a second, his hand on the doorknob. "Thanks for understanding." He slipped inside, and the door closed with a soft, final click. Walter heard the lock turn. For a long moment, Walter just stood there on the porch, holding his pie, watching the snow fall. Through the tall windows flanking the door, he could see shapes moving, people gathering in the dining room. A woman with elaborate blonde curls that would be Vivian was directing servers in white jackets. Someone was laughing, their head thrown back in exaggerated amusement. The Christmas tree in the front room was enormous, at least 12 feet tall, decorated entirely in white and silver. It looked like something from a magazine. There was no handmade ornament anywhere on it, no mismatched strings. Of lights collected over years, no treasured angel with a chipped wing. Walter turned and walked down the steps. His shoes, polished so carefully that morning, slipped on the thin layer of snow accumulating on the marble. He caught himself on the iron railing, his arthritic fingers screaming in protest. The cold was seeping through his thin dress coat. He'd thought he'd be inside. He'd thought he'd be sitting at a warm table, surrounded by family, maybe telling Emma's daughter about the Christmas when Marcus was 7 and tried to stay awake to catch Santa Claus. The neighborhood was one of those new developments where every house tried to outdo the last. Giant wreaths on every door, rooflines dripping with thousands of white lights, inflatable snowmen and light-up reindeer covering perfectly manicured lawns. Everything was pristine and expensive and cold. Walter's apartment was 11 miles away. He'd taken an Uber to get here, spending $23 he really couldn't spare. He pulled out his phone with numb fingers and opened the app. The estimated wait time was 47 minutes, surge pricing for Christmas Eve. The ride home would cost $51. He started walking instead. The memories came without permission, rising up with each painful step. Marcus, at 6 years old, gap-toothed and grinning, helping Walter sort mail at the kitchen table. Walter had sometimes brought work home, stuffing advertising circulars into envelopes for extra money. Marcus would sit beside him, his small fingers clumsy but determined, asking endless questions about where all the letters went. "Who lives in California, Daddy? Is it really always sunny there? Can we go someday?" Marcus, at 10, sobbing in Walter's arms the first week at Riverside Academy, the private school Walter had somehow scraped together tuition for. The other kids made fun of his clothes, his lunchbox, the fact that his dad drove a 15-year-old sedan with a dented bumper. Walter had worked 16-hour days for a year to afford that school. He'd delivered mail during the day and cleaned office buildings at night. He'd lived on ramen noodles and black coffee. He'd worn shoes with holes in the soles, layering cardboard inside to make them last another month. But Marcus got his private school education. Marcus, at 16, embarrassed when Walter showed up to parent-teacher conferences in his postal uniform because he'd come straight from work. "I'll meet you at home, Dad," Marcus had said, his voice tight with teenage mortification. "You don't need to be here." Marcus, at 22, graduating from State University with a business degree, Walter had taken out loans to finance, loans he was still paying off when he retired. Marcus had barely looked at him during the ceremony, had spent the whole reception talking to his new girlfriend's parents, who owned a chain of car dealerships. Walter had told himself it was normal. Sons grew up. They built their own lives. They moved, beyond their parents' working-class roots. It didn't mean they loved you less. Except, maybe it did. His chest was starting to hurt, not the sharp pain of a heart attack. He knew what that felt like. He'd had a mild one 3 years ago. This was different. This was the dull, spreading ache of something deeper than muscle and tissue breaking. The pie was getting heavy. His arms shook with the effort of holding it. Snow was accumulating on the aluminum foil he'd wrapped so carefully over the top. He'd crimped the edges. He'd written "Merry Christmas, son" on a little tag attached with red ribbon. He'd thought this Christmas would be different. For 3 years, Marcus had been too busy for holidays, too much work, too many obligations, Vivian's family traditions. But this year, Marcus had called. He'd actually called, not texted. He'd said it was time. Time to be a family again. Time to rebuild what they'd lost. Walter had been so happy. He'd gone to the store and bought ingredients for the pie with money he'd been saving for new prescription glasses. His current ones were held together with tape. He'd spent hours cleaning his apartment, even though Marcus wouldn't see it. He'd practiced conversations in his head, safe topics that wouldn't embarrass his successful son. He wouldn't mention his work at the post office. He wouldn't talk about the old neighborhood. He'd ask questions about real estate and nod and be proud and appropriate and fit the aesthetic. A car passed, its headlights sweeping across him. Through the window, he saw a family. Kids in the back seat, parents in front, everyone singing. Their mouths were moving in unison, probably Christmas carols. They looked warm, they looked happy. They looked like what he'd thought tonight would be. Walter's foot caught on an uneven patch of sidewalk hidden beneath the snow. He stumbled, his arms windmilling, and the pie flew from his hands. It hit the ground with a ceramic crack. The dish shattered. Apple filling, still faintly warm from where he'd carried it against his chest, spread across the white snow in a steaming brown mess. He stared at it. His wife's recipe. 3 hours of work, 23 years of missing her, 45 years of loving a son who was ashamed of him, all of it there in the snow, broken and ruined and pointless. Walter sat down right there on the curb, in the snow, in his good suit, and he put his face in his hands. He didn't cry. He'd forgotten how. But his shoulders shook and his breath came in harsh gasps, and 78 years of trying to be enough crashed down on him all at once. The snow kept falling. The houses glowed warm and bright, and Walter Hayes, who had given everything, who had sacrificed everything, who had loved with everything he had, sat alone in the cold on Christmas Eve, finally understanding that it had never been enough. He would never be enough, not for the son he'd raised, not for the life Marcus wanted, not for the aesthetic of a perfect holiday. He was just too old. Walter didn't remember deciding to walk. He didn't remember standing up from the curb or leaving the broken pie behind. His body moved on autopilot, one foot in front of the other, while his mind circled the same thought over and over like water down a drain. Too old. Too old. Too old. The neighborhood changed around him without him noticing. The mansions gave way to smaller homes, then to modest single-story houses, then to apartment complexes with peeling paint and chain-link fences. The elaborate light displays disappeared, replaced by simpler decorations. A wreath on a door here, a string of colored bulbs there. Some windows were dark, some glowed with the blue flicker of television screens. His fingers had gone numb 20 minutes ago. He couldn't feel his toes anymore. The thin dress coat that had seemed adequate in his heated apartment was useless against the wind that had picked up, driving snow into his face like tiny needles. His chest hurt with each breath. His legs trembled with exhaustion. There was a small park ahead, just a square of brown grass and a few benches surrounding a rusted swing set. Walter made it to the nearest bench and collapsed onto it. The cold metal burned through his dress pants. He slumped forward, his elbows on his knees, his head hanging down. Snow gathered on his shoulders and in his white hair. He should call someone. He should call for a ride. He should get up and find shelter. But the weight pressing down on him was too heavy. It pinned him to the bench as surely as iron chains. What was the point? Where would he go? Back to his empty apartment with its silent rooms and its refrigerator holding a single carton of eggs and half a loaf of bread? Back to his neighbors who were all spending Christmas Eve with their families? The shivering started deep in his core and spread outward. His teeth chattered so hard he bit his tongue and tasted copper. His thoughts were getting fuzzy around the edges, like someone had smeared Vaseline on a camera lens. That was bad. He knew that was bad, but he couldn't remember why. Hey. Hey, sir. The voice came from very far away. Are you okay? Walter tried to lift his head, but the world tilted and swam. A face appeared in his blurry vision. Young, concerned, dark hair dusted with snow. Sir, can you hear me? I need you to stay with me, okay? The voice was calm but urgent, the voice of someone used to emergencies. Strong hands gripped Walter's shoulders. Oh, no. No, you're hypothermic. How long have you been out here? Walter's mouth wouldn't form words. His jaw was locked, his tongue thick and useless. "Okay, we're getting you inside right now. Can you stand? I'm going to help you." One arm wrapped around Walter's back, another gripped his elbow, and suddenly he was being lifted. His legs didn't want to work. They buckled and folded like wet cardboard. "I've got you. Just lean on me. Come on, one step. That's it. One more. My place is right here. Just a few more steps." Walter was vaguely aware of movement, of climbing stairs, of a door opening. Then warmth, glorious and painful, washing over him. His skin burned where the heat touched it. He gasped, "Easy, easy. Don't warm up too fast. Sit here. Let me get these wet things off you." Walter found himself on a worn couch. Hands were removing his coat, his suit jacket, peeling off his wet shoes and socks. A blanket, soft and smelling faintly of laundry detergent, wrapped around his shoulders. Another covered his legs. "I'm calling 911, the voice said. "No," Walter managed to croak, his first word in what felt like hours. "No hospital. Sir, you have hypothermia. You need medical attention. No money, no insurance." Walter forced his eyes to focus. The young man kneeling in front of him was maybe mid-30s, with kind eyes and 2 days of stubble on his jaw. He wore jeans and a faded sweatshirt with a fire department logo. "Can't afford it." The man's face softened with understanding and something that looked like pain. "Okay," he said quietly. "Okay. But I'm a paramedic, and I'm going to monitor you very closely. If your condition deteriorates at all, we're going to the ER and we'll figure out the money later. Deal?" Walter nodded weakly. "I'm Daniel. Daniel Cooper." He stood and moved to the kitchen, which was separated from the living room by only a breakfast bar. He filled a kettle and set it on the stove. "What's your name, sir?" "Walter." "Walter Hayes." "Okay, Walter, I'm making you some warm tea. Not hot, just warm. We need to bring your core temperature up gradually." He opened a cabinet and frowned at its meager contents. One box of tea bags. He pulled it out. It was only then that Walter's vision cleared enough to really see the apartment. It was tiny, maybe 400 square feet total. The living room held the couch he was sitting on, a coffee table with scratches and water rings, and a small television on a plastic crate. The kitchen had a 2-burner stove, a dorm-sized refrigerator, and counters empty of everything except a dish rack holding 2 plates, 2 bowls, and a handful of mismatched utensils. But the walls were covered in construction paper decorations, snowflakes cut with careful precision, each one different. Chains made of red and green paper loops, a banner spelling out "Merry Christmas" in letters colored with marker, some staying inside the lines and some not. A drawing of a Christmas tree with presents underneath, done in crayon with the fierce concentration of a child. At the top of the tree was a star that sparkled with glued-on glitter. "Daddy?" A small voice came from a doorway to what must be the bedroom. "Is everything okay?" "Everything's fine, sweetheart," Daniel said, his voice immediately gentling. "Go back to bed." But a little girl appeared in the doorway anyway. She was maybe 6 years old, wearing pajamas printed with reindeer. Her dark hair was tangled from sleep. Her eyes, the same warm brown as her father's, were wide with curiosity and concern. "There's a grandpa on our couch," she observed. "This is Mr. Hayes," Daniel explained. "He got very cold outside, so he's warming up with us. Walter, this is my daughter Emma." "Hi," Emma said shyly. She padded across the room on bare feet and climbed onto the couch beside Walter, maintaining a respectful distance but studying him with frank interest. "Were you lost?" "Something like that," Walter managed. His voice was getting stronger as warmth seeped back into his body. "It's Christmas Eve," Emma said. "You should be with your family." The words were innocent, without guile, but they punched into Walter's chest like a fist. "Yes," he said. "I should be." Daniel appeared with a mug of steaming tea. He shot his daughter a look that was half exasperation, half affection. "Emma, maybe Mr. Hayes doesn't want to talk about that right now." "It's okay," Walter said. He accepted the mug, wrapping both hands around it. The ceramic was warm but not burning. He took a careful sip. The tea was plain, no sugar or milk, but it was the best thing he'd ever tasted. Emma was still watching him. "We're not with our family either," she said matter-of-factly. "We don't have any except us." Mommy died when I was born. Emma, Daniel said, a warning in his voice. It's okay, Daddy. The girl turned back to Walter. She died, but it's not sad anymore because I didn't know her, so I can't miss her. Daddy says she was very brave and very beautiful, and she loved me very much, even though we never met. She was all those things, Daniel said softly. His hand rested on his daughter's head, a gesture so tender it made Walter's throat tighten. So it's just us, Emma continued. We were supposed to have Christmas at Daddy's work because they always do a party, but Daddy doesn't work there anymore. Emma, that's enough, Daniel said, but there was no real force behind it. He sat down in the single armchair across from the couch. It was patched with duct tape on one arm. I don't mind, Walter said, and he realized he meant it. The girl's chatter was pulling him out of the dark place he'd been sinking into. What happened? Daniel ran a hand through his hair, leaving it standing up in dark spikes. Budget cuts at the firehouse. Last hired, first fired. I was picking up extra shifts driving for a delivery service, but I got into a fender bender last week. Wasn't my fault, but the company has a zero-tolerance policy for accidents, so now I'm looking. Walter's eyes drifted to the breakfast bar. Half hidden under a dish towel was an envelope. The top edge showed red letters, Final Notice. Beside it was a stack of papers. He couldn't read them from here, but the logo at the top looked medical. Bills, probably. We're okay, though, Emma said with the determined optimism of a child trying to convince herself. Daddy says after Christmas, things will get better. He has interviews. 3 of them, Daniel confirmed. Good. One's with the county EMS. Better pay, better benefits. It's just a matter of getting through the next few weeks. What about Christmas? Walter asked. The question came out before he could stop it. I'm sorry. That's none of my business. It's okay, Daniel said. He glanced at his daughter, and Walter saw a world of pain in that look. We're doing Christmas a little differently this year. Right, Em? Right, Emma said, but her voice was smaller now. We're doing a gratitude Christmas instead of a presents Christmas. We're grateful for our apartment and our health and each other. That's beautiful, Walter said, and he meant it. But he also saw what Emma was trying to hide, the way her eyes kept drifting to the window as if hoping to see something magical appear, the way her hands twisted in her lap. She was 6 years old on Christmas Eve, and there would be no presents under a tree because there was no tree. The kettle whistled again. Daniel got up to make himself tea. While his back was turned, Emma leaned closer to Walter. Can I tell you a secret? She whispered. Of course, Walter whispered back. I made Daddy a present. It's a card with a picture of us, but I couldn't get him anything real because I don't have money. She bit her lip. I think he's sad about it. He tries to hide it, but I can tell. I'm sure he loves your card more than anything you could buy, Walter said gently. Do you have kids? Emma asked. 1. A son. Is he nice? Walter's chest constricted. He used to be. Daniel returned with his tea, and Emma finally went back to bed, after extracting a promise from Walter that he'd still be there in the morning. Daniel settled back into the patched armchair, and the 2 men sat in comfortable silence for a moment, sipping their tea. Thank you, Walter finally said, for helping me. You didn't have to. Of course I did, Daniel replied, looking genuinely confused by the statement. You needed help. Not everyone would see it that way. Then not everyone is paying attention. Daniel studied him for a moment. Do you want to talk about what happened? Why you were out there? Walter opened his mouth to say no, to brush it off, to maintain his dignity. But something about this small apartment with its paper decorations and its struggling single father and its sweet, hopeful little girl broke down the walls he'd built. The whole story came tumbling out. Marcus, the invitation, the rejection, the aesthetic, the pie broken in the snow. When he finished, Daniel was quiet for a long time. Then he said, very carefully, as if the words were fragile and might shatter, I'm going to say something, and I hope you don't take offense. Walter braced himself. Your son is an idiot. Despite everything, Walter felt his mouth twitch. That's not offensive. Good, because I mean it. Daniel leaned forward, his elbows on his knees, his expression intense. I lost my wife 6 years ago. Emma will never know her mother. I would give anything, everything I have or will ever have, for one more Christmas with her, for one more hour. And your son, who has you right there, alive and wanting to spend time with him, he turns you away because you don't fit his aesthetic? It sounds worse when you say it like that, Walter murmured. It is worse. Daniel's voice was fierce now. Walter, I don't know you, but I know you raised that man. You gave him life and presumably love and opportunity, and he should be grateful every single day that he still has you. The fact that he's not? That's not about you being too old. That's about him being too foolish to see what he has before it's gone. The words settled into Walter's chest, warm and solid. He'd spent the entire walk here believing Marcus's rejection was his fault, that if he'd been different, better, more sophisticated, more successful, then he would have been enough. But listening to Daniel, seeing his fierce defense of a stranger, Walter began to wonder if maybe, just maybe, the failure wasn't his. Outside, church bells began to chime midnight. Christmas Day had arrived. Walter closed his eyes and listened to the sound, feeling the warmth of the blanket around his shoulders, the tea in his hands, the presence of this young father who had shown him more kindness in an hour than his own son had shown him in years. When he opened his eyes, Daniel was watching him with concern. "How are you feeling, temperature-wise?" "Better," Walter said. "Much better. Thanks to you." "You're welcome to stay the night," Daniel offered. "The couch isn't much, but it's warm and dry." Walter looked around the tiny apartment, at the empty kitchen and the pile of bills and the paper snowflakes made by small hands. He looked at Daniel, whose eyes were shadowed with exhaustion and worry, but still held kindness, and he made a decision. "Daniel," he said slowly, "what if I told you I'd like to do something for you and Emma for Christmas?" Daniel's face immediately closed off. "That's not necessary. I helped you because it was the right thing to do, not because I wanted something in return." "I know that," Walter said quickly. "That's exactly why I want to do this. Please, hear me out." Daniel crossed his arms, his posture defensive but his eyes curious. Walter recognized the pride of a man who'd been struggling for too long, who'd learned to be suspicious of offers that seemed too good to be true. "I know what you're thinking," Walter said. "You're thinking I'm some charity case you picked up off a bench, and now I'm trying to turn the tables and make you the charity case. But that's not what this is." "Then what is it?" Daniel asked quietly. Walter set his tea mug on the coffee table and leaned back against the couch. For the first time since sitting down, he noticed the frame on the small bookshelf beside the television. It held a photo of Daniel, younger and cleaner shaven, holding a newborn baby wrapped in a pink blanket. Beside him stood a woman with Daniel's warm eyes and a tired, radiant smile. She looked like she'd just accomplished something extraordinary. She had. "My son thinks I'm poor," Walter began. "He thinks I'm just a retired postal worker living on a fixed income, barely scraping by. And I've let him think that because I wanted him to make his own way. I didn't want him relying on me or expecting an inheritance." Daniel listened without interrupting. "But the truth is," Walter continued, "I'm not poor. I worked for the Postal Service for 43 years. I have a pension that's more than adequate. My wife and we bought our house in 1978 for $31,000. I sold it 4 years ago for $490,000. I live modestly because that's how I was raised and because after my wife died, I didn't see the point in spending money on things I didn't need." He paused, gauging Daniel's reaction. The younger man's expression was carefully neutral. "I have savings," Walter said simply, "substantial savings, and no one to spend them on. My son has made it very clear he doesn't need me or my money. So when I say I want to do something for you and Emma, I'm not offering charity. I'm offering to share what I have with people who might actually appreciate it." "I don't know," Daniel said slowly. "It feels wrong. We just met." "You saved my life tonight," Walter said. "I was sitting on that bench and I'd given up. I was going to sit there until I froze to death and I didn't even care. You pulled me back. You brought me into your home, gave me warmth and tea and kindness when you have every reason to keep your door locked and your resources protected. The least I can do is buy you a Christmas dinner." Daniel's jaw worked. He looked toward the bedroom where Emma slept, then back at Walter. "Just dinner?" "Just dinner," Walter confirmed. "And maybe a small tree. Some decorations, 1 or 2 presents for Emma. Nothing extravagant. Just a Christmas." For a long moment, Daniel said nothing. Then, so quietly, Walter almost didn't hear it. "She asked me yesterday if Santa knew we moved, if he'd still be able to find us at the new apartment." Walter's heart cracked. "I told her Santa always finds good kids," Daniel continued. His voice was rough. "I told her not to worry. And then I stayed up until 3 in the morning trying to figure out how I could afford even one present, just one, so she'd have something to open. But the rent is due, and Emma needs her inhaler refilled, and I can't. I just can't make the math work." "Then let me help make it work," Walter said gently. Daniel looked at him, and Walter saw the exact moment the pride crumbled, replaced by desperate, grateful hope. "Okay," he whispered. "Okay. Thank you." They sat in silence for a moment, the weight and relief of the decision settling between them. Then, from the bedroom doorway, came a small voice. "Are you still here?" Emma stood in the doorway again, rubbing her eyes with one small fist. Her reindeer pajamas were rumpled and her hair stuck up. On one side. "I thought you were a dream," she said, looking at Walter. "Sometimes I dream about having a grandpa." "Oi, Emma," Daniel started, but Walter held up a hand. "Come here, sweetheart," Walter said. Emma padded over and climbed onto the couch beside him, curling up against his side with the unself-conscious trust of a child. She smelled like baby shampoo and sleep. "I'm real," Walter assured her, "not a dream." "Good," Emma said, "because I made extra decorations. See?" She pointed to the paper chain draped across the window. "I made it long enough for a grandpa, too, just in case we got one for Christmas." Walter felt his eyes burn. He blinked rapidly, trying to hold back tears he hadn't shed in years. "Did you now?" "Uh-huh, and I made an extra stocking out of a paper bag. It has your name on it and everything." "You don't know my name," Walter pointed out, a smile tugging at his lips despite everything. "It says Grandpa," Emma explained, as if this were obvious, "because that's what grandpas are called." "Emma," Daniel said, his voice gentle but firm, "Mr. Hayes isn't your grandpa. He has his own family." "Actually," Walter heard himself say, "I'd be honored to be your grandpa, if you'll have me." Emma's head snapped up, her eyes wide. "Really?" "Really," Walter confirmed, and as he said it, he felt something shift inside him. Something that had been frozen and brittle began to thaw. Emma threw her arms around his neck and squeezed with all the strength her small body could muster. Walter hugged her back, this child he'd known for less than an hour, and felt more wanted than he had in years. Over Emma's head, he met Daniel's eyes. The younger man's face was a mixture of gratitude and something that looked like awe. "So," Walter said, his voice muffled by Emma's hair, "what do you say we make tomorrow a real Christmas? But we'll need to do some shopping first thing in the morning." Emma pulled back. "Shopping? Like at a store?" "Like at a store," Walter confirmed. "We need food for Christmas dinner. And I think we need a tree. And maybe, just maybe, Santa left something at the store for a very good girl who made beautiful decorations." Emma's face lit up like sunrise. She looked at her father. "Daddy, can we?" Daniel's eyes were suspiciously bright. "Yeah, sweetheart. We can." They left at 8 in the morning, after Walter had dozed fitfully on the couch, and Emma had gotten exactly 0 additional sleep due to excitement. The snow had stopped during the night, leaving the world covered in a pristine white blanket. The sun was bright and cold, making the snow sparkle like it had been dusted with diamonds. Walter's first stop was an ATM, where he withdrew $500 while Daniel and Emma waited in Daniel's battered Honda Civic. Then they drove to the big grocery store on the edge of town, one of the few open on Christmas Day until noon. Inside, the store was surprisingly crowded with other last-minute shoppers. Walter grabbed a cart and looked at Emma. "Okay, sweetheart, what do we need for Christmas dinner?" "Turkey," Emma said immediately. A big one, and mashed potatoes, and green beans but not the mushy kind, and rolls that are fluffy, and pie, apple pie. Walter's breath caught. That's exactly right. How did you know? Daddy reads me stories about Christmas dinner, Emma explained, so I'd know what it's supposed to be like. Walter looked at Daniel, who had the grace to look embarrassed. I checked out some books from the library, he admitted. I wanted her to know about traditions, even if we couldn't always do them. Well, Walter said, clearing the emotion from his throat, let's make those stories real. They filled the cart with everything they needed. A 12-pound turkey, the last one in the freezer, potatoes and butter and cream, fresh green beans, a bag of rolls, ingredients for stuffing. Walter added things Emma didn't mention: cranberry sauce, sweet potatoes, marshmallows for the top, ingredients for his wife's apple pie. At one point, Daniel pulled him aside. Walter, this is too much. The bill is going to be enormous. I have the money, Walter said simply, and more importantly, I have someone to share it with. That's worth more than you know. In the produce section, Emma spotted the craft station the store had set up, a small table with construction paper, glue, markers, and glitter. A sign read, "Make a free ornament. Take home a memory." Can I? Emma asked, practically vibrating with excitement. Of course, Walter said. He and Daniel hung back, watching as Emma settled at the table with intense focus. She selected red construction paper and carefully cut out a circle. Then she drew on it with silver marker, her tongue poking out in concentration. You've given her something I couldn't, Daniel said quietly. Hope. You've given her something more important, Walter replied. Love, security, sacrifice. That's what matters. I keep thinking about your son, Daniel said. His voice was hesitant. I don't mean to pry, but how does someone raised by you turn out like that? Walter was quiet for a moment, watching Emma add glitter to her creation. I've asked myself that question 1,000 times. I think maybe I did too much. I worked so hard to give him opportunities I never had. Private school, college, connections. But somewhere along the way, he learned to be ashamed of where he came from. Of me. That's not your fault, Daniel said firmly. Isn't it? Walter asked. I taught him to value success, to strive for more. Maybe he just took the lesson too far. No, Daniel said. Success without gratitude is just greed. That's not what you taught him. That's what he chose. Emma returned, holding her ornament carefully in both hands. It was a red circle with silver letters spelling out Grandpa Walter and a Christmas tree drawn in green marker. Glitter covered every available surface. It's perfect, Walter said, his voice thick. It's for you, Emma explained, so you remember today. I could never forget. Today, Walter assured her. Their last stop was the tree lot. Most of the good trees were gone, but Emma found a scraggly 4-foot pine in the back that she insisted was perfect. It's like the Charlie Brown tree, she explained. It just needs love. They bought it, along with a stand and a single strand of lights. Walter tried to buy more ornaments, but Daniel drew the line. We have Emma's paper decorations. That's all we need. Back at the apartment, they worked together in a comfortable rhythm. Daniel prepared the turkey under Walter's guidance, while Emma created a forest of new paper ornaments. Walter made his wife's stuffing, his hands remembering the motions after all these years. He told Emma stories about his wife, about how she'd always hummed while she cooked, how she'd let him lick the spoon when she made pie filling. What was her name? Emma asked. Margaret, Walter said. But I called her Maggie. I bet she was beautiful, Emma said. She was, Walter agreed, inside and out. The turkey took hours, filling the small apartment with smells that made Walter's eyes sting with memory and longing and unexpected joy. They decorated the scraggly tree, draping it with Emma's paper chains and hanging her handmade ornaments from every branch. The strand of lights cast a warm glow. As afternoon faded into evening, they set the table with Daniel's mismatched plates and the food they'd prepared together. The turkey was golden and perfect. The mashed potatoes were fluffy. The green beans were tender but not mushy. The rolls were warm from the oven. And in the center of it all sat Walter's apple pie, The second one he'd made in 24 hours, this one intact and loved. They sat down, the three of them, at the small table. Emma between Walter and Daniel. "Should we say grace?" Walter asked. "Yes," Emma said immediately. She grabbed Walter's hand on one side and Daniel's on the other. They formed a circle. Walter closed his eyes. He'd said grace thousands of times in his life, but never had the words felt more true. "Dear Lord, thank you for this food, this home, and this family. Thank you for second chances and for showing me that Christmas isn't about perfection. It's about presence. It's about showing up and being there and choosing love even when it's hard. Bless this meal and bless these people who saved my life in more ways than one. Amen." "Amen," Daniel and Emma echoed. They ate slowly, savoring every bite. Emma chattered about everything and nothing. Daniel told funny stories from his paramedic days. Walter shared memories of Christmases past, editing out the loneliness and keeping only the joy. For the first time in years, he felt full, not just his stomach, but his heart. After dinner, Emma yawned hugely, her eyes drooping. "I think someone needs to get to bed," Daniel said gently. "But I'm not tired," Emma protested, even as another yawn cracked her jaw. "Santa can't come until you're asleep," Walter reminded her. Emma's eyes widened. She'd been so caught up in the day she'd almost forgotten. She scrambled off her chair and threw her arms around Walter. "Thank you, Grandpa Walter," she whispered. "This was the best Christmas ever." "Thank you, sweetheart," Walter whispered back. "You gave me the best gift of all." After Daniel tucked Emma into bed, he returned to find Walter washing dishes at the sink. "You don't have to do that," Daniel protested. "I want to," Walter said. "Besides, this is what family does. We help each other." "Family," Daniel repeated softly. He picked up a dish towel and started drying. "Thank you, Walter, for all of this. You didn't just give Emma a Christmas. You gave me hope that there are still good people in the world." "You're one of them," Walter said. "You didn't have to help me last night. But you did. Without hesitation. That's who you are." They worked in comfortable silence for a moment. Then Walter said, "I know you have interviews coming up. If you need a reference or help with anything, I'm here." "I might take you up on that," Daniel said. "Please do," Walter replied. "Because I meant what I said to Emma about being her grandpa. If you'll let me, I'd like to be part of your lives, not just for Christmas, for all of it." Daniel set down the plate he was drying and turned to face Walter. His eyes were bright with unshed tears. "We'd like that. We'd like that very much." They finished the dishes together, and as Walter dried his hands on the dish towel, he looked around the small apartment, at the scraggly tree with its paper ornaments, at the empty plates that had held so much more than food, at the man who'd opened his door to a stranger. And he realized that Marcus had been right about one thing. Walter hadn't fit the aesthetic of that perfect mansion with its curated guest list and its crystal chandeliers. But he fit here. In this tiny apartment with its patched furniture and its paper snowflakes and its overflowing love, he fit perfectly. And for the first time in a very long time, Walter Hayes felt like he was exactly where he was supposed to be. 11 miles across town, in the mansion Walter had been turned away from, Marcus Hayes was learning that perfection had a price. The dining room was a masterpiece of careful orchestration. Vivian had spent 6 weeks planning every detail. The table was set with their Versace china, each plate positioned exactly 1 inch from the table's edge. Crystal stemware caught the light from the vintage chandelier, casting prismatic rainbows across the white linen tablecloth. The centerpiece was a towering arrangement of white roses and silver branches that had cost $800 and blocked the view of the person sitting across from you. Candles in mercury glass holders flickered with precisely timed LED flames, no real fire to risk dripping wax or smoky residue. 22 people sat around the table, dressed in their holiday finest, designer dresses and tailored suits, jewelry that required insurance riders, watches that cost more than cars. They ate course after course prepared by the chef Vivian had flown in from Manhattan, seared scallops with champagne beurre blanc, beef Wellington with truffle demi-glace, roasted root vegetables arranged like art installations. Each course was announced with a pretentious description of its locally sourced, organic, sustainable origins. It was, by all objective measures, a perfect Christmas dinner. And Marcus had never been more miserable. Vivian sat at the opposite end of the table, her blonde hair arranged in an elaborate updo that had taken her stylist 3 hours to achieve. Her cream-colored designer gown probably cost more than Walter's monthly pension. She was holding court with her end of the table, her laugh bright and sharp as glass. Every few minutes she would pull out her phone and take another photo. The table, the food, candid shots of guests laughing at jokes that weren't funny. She posted each one to her Instagram with captions that made Marcus's teeth hurt. So blessed to spend Christmas with our chosen family. #grateful. #intimate gathering. #holiday magic. Intimate, Marcus thought bitterly. 22 people was intimate now. He'd tried to suggest that maybe, just maybe, they could have a smaller Christmas this year. Just family. Vivian had looked at him like he'd suggested they eat dinner out of a dumpster. "This is family," she'd said. "My parents, my brother, our closest friends. Who else would we invite?" He hadn't had an answer. Or rather, he'd had an answer, but it had been standing on his front porch holding a homemade pie, and Marcus had sent it away. The guilt had been eating at him all evening. Every time someone mentioned family or tradition or gratitude, he thought of his father walking away into the snow. He'd watched from an upstairs window, unable to stop himself. He'd seen Walter slip on the steps, seen him walk down the street, shoulders hunched against the cold, seen the exact moment the pie had fallen and shattered on the ground. And he'd done nothing. He'd just closed the curtain and come back downstairs to his perfect party. "Marcus, you're being awfully quiet." Vivian's father, Richard, was speaking to him from halfway down the table. His voice had that booming quality of men used to being heard. "Is everything all right?" "Everything's fine," Marcus said automatically. "Just tired, long week. Lots of exciting deals closing before the end of the year," Richard said approvingly. "That's what I like to hear. You know what they say, money never sleeps." "Actually, that's from a movie," someone interjected. "Wall Street." "Well, it's still true," Richard said, waving his wine glass. "Speaking of which, Marcus, I've been meaning to ask, are you interested in that waterfront development opportunity I mentioned? Could be very lucrative if we move fast." Marcus forced himself to engage, to smile, to discuss profit margins and zoning variances, but his mind was elsewhere. Where was his father now? Had he made it home safely? Should Marcus call him, text him? But what would he say? "I'm sorry you don't fit my aesthetic," felt even worse in retrospect than it had felt saying it. A woman across from him, Patricia something, wife of one of Richard's business partners, was looking at him with an odd expression. "Marcus Hayes," she said slowly. "Your father, he was a postal worker, wasn't he?" Marcus's stomach dropped. "Yes," he said carefully. "He's retired now." "I thought so," Patricia said, her face brightening. "I heard him speak once, years ago. It must have been, 15 or 20 years back. He gave a talk at the Riverside Community Center about the importance of public service. It was actually quite moving. He talked about how delivering mail wasn't just a job, it was connecting people, bringing them news and letters and packages that might be the best part of their day." "That sounds like him," Marcus said, his voice tight. "He was so passionate about it," Patricia continued, warming to her subject. "And he talked about his son, how proud he was that you were going to college, how he hoped you'd find work that mattered to you the way his work mattered to him. It was really very inspiring. I remember thinking what a lovely man he was." The table had gone quiet. Everyone was listening now. Marcus felt Vivian's eyes on him from the other end, sharp and assessing. "That's wonderful," Vivian said, her voice dripping with false warmth. "Where's your father spending Christmas, darling?" "You never did say." The lie came easily, smoothly, greased by years of practice. "Oh, he's traveling, spending the holidays somewhere warm. Arizona, I think. He mentioned wanting to escape the snow." "How nice," Patricia said, "though I'm surprised he'd want to be away from family at Christmas." "He's very independent," Marcus said. "Always has been. He prefers his own company." Another lie. His father had never preferred solitude. Walter Hayes had been the dad who coached Little League and volunteered at school events and knew every neighbor's name. He'd been lonely since Marcus's mother died, desperately lonely, and Marcus had known it and done nothing. "Well, give him my regards if you speak to him," Patricia said. Tell him Patricia Thornton still remembers his speech. It actually influenced my decision to get involved with the literacy program at the library. I will, Marcus lied again. The conversation moved on, but Marcus couldn't shake the feeling of eyes on him. He looked up to find Vivian's brother, Preston, watching him with an unreadable expression. Preston was scrolling through his phone, barely touching his food. He'd been glued to his screen all evening, supposedly monitoring some investment portfolio, but now his eyes kept flicking from the phone to Marcus and back again. The dessert course arrived, 7 options, just as promised. Chocolate torte, creme brulee, fruit tart, tiramisu, bread pudding, panna cotta, and a shoti, deconstructed apple pie that looked nothing like a pie, and everything like pretension on a plate. Marcus took the apple and immediately wished he hadn't. It made him think of the real pie, the one made with his mother's recipe, the one currently freezing into the sidewalk somewhere in the snow. He was pushing the deconstructed elements around his plate when Preston suddenly gasped. The sound was sharp enough to cut through the ambient chatter. Several people looked his way. "Oh my God," Preston said, staring at his phone. "What is it, darling?" his wife asked. Preston didn't answer. He was rapidly scrolling, his face going pale, then red, then pale again. He looked up at Marcus and there was something in his expression. Horror. Pity. Disgust? "Marcus," Preston said slowly, "I think you need to see this." "See what?" Vivian demanded, her voice sharp with the irritation of a hostess whose perfect evening was being disrupted. Preston turned his phone around. On the screen was a social media post. The header read, "Heartwarming. Rejected elderly man finds real family with struggling single dad on Christmas Eve." Below it were photos. The first showed an old man in a dark suit sitting on a bench in the snow, his head in his hands, his posture radiating defeat. The next showed a younger man in a sweatshirt approaching him. The third showed the younger man helping the old man to his feet, supporting his weight, guiding him toward an apartment building in the background. Marcus's heart stopped, because he recognized the old man, the navy suit, the burgundy tie with silver snowflakes, his father. The post had been shared by a local feel-good news account that had 150,000 followers. The story had been picked up by several other accounts. The post itself had 40,000 shares and counting. Marcus reached for the phone with a trembling hand. Preston let him take it. Marcus read the caption, each word a hammer blow. Christmas Eve magic. This elderly man, identified by neighbors as Walter Hayes, 78, was found collapsed on a bench in the Riverside neighborhood, suffering from hypothermia and exposure. He'd been rejected from his own son's Christmas dinner party for being, quote, too old and not fitting the aesthetic. Daniel Cooper, 34, a recently unemployed paramedic and single father, found him and brought him into his home despite having almost nothing himself. According to neighbors, Cooper and his 6-year-old daughter Emma shared their Christmas with Hayes, giving him the family his own son denied him. This is what the holiday spirit looks like. Faith in humanity restored. The comments below were in the thousands. Marcus scrolled through them, each one worse than the last. That son should be ashamed of himself. Too old? What kind of monster says that to their parent? I hope someone identifies that heartless son and exposes him. People like that don't deserve success. Meanwhile, this single dad who lost. His job is opening his home to a stranger. That's a real man right there. The son probably makes 6 figures and can't spare one dinner for his own father. Disgusting. I'm crying. That little girl gave him the Christmas his own flesh and blood wouldn't. Children understand what matters. If you won't claim your father, the rest of us will. Walter Hayes, you're invited to my Christmas next year. Marcus's phone sitting beside his plate suddenly lit up. Then it started buzzing. 1 notification, 2, 5, 10, 20. They came in a cascading flood. Text messages, emails, social media tags, missed calls. He picked it up with numb fingers and opened his messages. The first was from his business mentor, Lawrence Cheng, a man Marcus respected above almost anyone else. Marcus, I'm seeing reports that you turned your elderly father away from Christmas dinner. Please tell me this isn't true. Call me immediately. The next was from a major client. Hayes, what the hell is this about your father? We value family at our company. This doesn't reflect well on our partnership. Another from a colleague. Dude, you're all over social media and it's not good. Might want to get ahead of this. His business partner. Marcus, we need to talk. The Riverside Gardens investors are asking questions. They're concerned about your character. On and on they went. Disappointment, disgust, concern, threats to pull funding, questions about his judgment, his values, his fitness to lead. Across the table, Vivian had grabbed her own phone. Her face had gone from perfectly composed to stark white. Her carefully curated Instagram feed was being flooded with comments. People were connecting her posts about their intimate, blessed, magical Christmas with the story of Walter sitting alone on a bench in the snow. Your intimate family gathering didn't include your husband's father, someone commented. Classy. All this food and wealth and you couldn't spare a seat for an elderly man? Hope that aesthetic was worth it. Vivian looked up, her eyes finding Marcus across the table. In them, he saw pure fury. What did you do? She hissed. The other guests were all on their phones now, finding the story, reading it, looking at Marcus with expressions ranging from shock to disgust to barely concealed schadenfreude. Patricia Thornton, who'd spoken so warmly about Walter's speech, was staring at Marcus like she was seeing him for the first time and hating what she saw. You told me he was traveling, she said quietly. You told me he preferred to be alone. But he was sitting on a bench freezing to death because you turned him away. It's not, Marcus started, but he had no idea how to finish that sentence. It's not what it looks like. Except it was exactly what it looked like. It's not my fault, except it absolutely was. I need to speak with you, Vivian said, her voice ice. Now. She stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the hardwood floor. She walked out of the dining room, her heels clicking sharply. Marcus had no choice but to follow. She led him to his study and closed the door. The moment it clicked shut, she rounded on him. Do you have any idea what you've done? She snarled. Any idea at all? Vivian, let me explain. Explain what, Marcus? That you're exactly as heartless as that post says? That you turned away your own father on Christmas Eve because he didn't meet my standards? Not your standards, Marcus said weakly. I just thought. You thought what? That having a postal worker at our table would embarrass us? Well, congratulations, you've embarrassed us worse than anything your father ever could have. She shoved her phone in his face. Look at this. Look at what they're saying about me. About us. Marcus looked. Vivian's social media comments were brutal. Gold digger, trophy wife with no heart, fake, shallow. Every blessed, grateful, magical post she'd made tonight was being thrown back in her face with vicious mockery. My father's being tagged in this, Vivian said, her voice shaking. My father, who chairs the board of 3 companies. Preston's firm is being mentioned. Do you understand what this does to my family's reputation? To our reputation? Our reputation, Marcus thought distantly. Not his father's well-being, not the cruelty of what they'd done, just the reputation. You need to fix this, Vivian said, right now. Call your father, apologize, get him to make a statement that it was all a misunderstanding. I don't think he'll do that, Marcus said. Then make him, Vivian snapped. Offer him money, offer him anything. Because if you don't fix this, Marcus, I swear to God I will file for divorce and take you for everything you have. I will not let your failure as a son destroy everything I've built. Everything you've built? Marcus heard his voice rising. You married into it, Vivian. You didn't build anything. Her hand cracked across his face, the sound sharp in the quiet room. He stood there, stunned, his cheek burning. Get out, she said, her voice deadly quiet. Fix this or don't come back. Marcus walked out of the study in a daze. The party had disintegrated. Guests were gathering their coats, making hasty excuses. No one would meet his eyes. Richard was helping his wife with her fur stole, his face a mask of cold disappointment. Preston and his wife were already gone. Marcus stood in his marble foyer, surrounded by his perfectly curated Christmas decorations, and watched his carefully constructed life collapse around him. His phone continued its relentless buzzing. More messages, more tags, more people seeing what he'd done, what he'd become. Through the tall windows, he could see snow falling again, gentle and pure, covering the world in white, covering the broken pie on the sidewalk, covering the footprints his father had left walking away. And Marcus Hayes, who'd had everything and lost the only thing that mattered, finally understood the cost of his aesthetic perfection. It had cost him his father, his marriage, his reputation, his self-respect. It had cost him his soul, and he'd paid it willingly, without hesitation, without ever stopping to ask if the price was worth it. Now, standing in his empty mansion while his perfect party guests fled into the night, he finally had his answer. It wasn't. 3 days after Christmas, Marcus stood outside his father's apartment building, his hands shaking. Not from cold this time, though the December air was bitter. From fear. The building was in a neighborhood Marcus hadn't visited in over a decade. It was old but well-maintained, the kind of place where rent was affordable and neighbors knew each other's names. The lobby smelled like someone's cooking, something with garlic and tomatoes. A bulletin board near the mailboxes advertised a New Year's potluck and a lost cat named Whiskers. It was modest, ordinary, completely unremarkable. It was nothing like Marcus's mansion, and he'd never been more ashamed of that mansion than he was right now. He'd spent the last 3 days in hell. Vivian had made good on her threat, moving into her parents' house and instructing her lawyer to begin divorce proceedings. His phone had been an endless stream of professional disaster. 2 major clients had terminated their contracts. The Riverside Gardens investors had pulled out completely, costing him millions. His business partner had suggested, in terms that left no room for argument, that Marcus take a leave of absence until the scandal died down. But worse than all of that, worse than the money and the reputation and the marriage, was the knowledge of what he'd done. He'd seen the photos 1,000 times now. His father on that bench, broken and defeated. His father being helped by a stranger who'd shown more compassion in 5 minutes than Marcus had shown in 5 years. He'd tried calling. Walter hadn't answered. He'd sent texts. No response. Finally, desperate, he'd driven across town to do what he should have done on Christmas Eve. Show up. Be there. Ask for forgiveness he probably didn't deserve. He climbed the stairs to the 2nd floor and found apartment 207. Before he could knock, the door next to it opened. An elderly woman with bright eyes and silver hair poked her head out. "You're the son," she said. It wasn't a question. Her voice held no warmth. "Yes, ma'am," Marcus said quietly. "He's in there," the woman said, "with his real family." She emphasized the last 2 words like a slap. "You broke that man's heart. You should be ashamed of yourself." "I am," Marcus said. His voice cracked. "I am ashamed." The woman studied him for a long moment, then her expression softened slightly. "Well, at least you're here now. That's something, I suppose." She retreated into her apartment and closed the door. Marcus knocked. His heart hammered against his ribs. He heard voices inside, then footsteps. The door opened. His father stood there. Walter looked older than Marcus. Remembered, the lines on his face deeper, but his eyes were clear and steady. He didn't look surprised. He looked resigned. "Marcus," Walter said. No warmth, no anger, just acknowledgement. "Dad?" Marcus started, then his voice failed him. He'd rehearsed a speech on the drive over, explanations and apologies and promises. But standing face to face with the man he'd turned away into the snow, all his words felt hollow and insufficient. "Come in," Walter said, stepping aside. "But I should tell you, Daniel and Emma are coming over in a few minutes. If you'd rather not be here for that, I understand." The implication was clear. Marcus could stay and face the people who'd shown his father more kindness than he had, or he could leave like he'd made his father leave. It was a test, and they both knew it. "I'll stay," Marcus said, "if that's okay." Walter nodded and let him in. The apartment was small, maybe 600 square feet. A living room with a worn but comfortable-looking couch, a small kitchen separated by a breakfast bar, 2 closed doors that must lead to a bedroom and bathroom. It was tidy and clean. The furniture was old but well cared for. On the walls were photographs. Marcus recognized some of them. His mother, young and smiling. Himself as a child. But there were new photos too, recent ones. Walter with a little girl, both of them grinning at the camera. Walter with a young man and the same girl, the 3 of them standing in front of a Christmas tree. The tree was still up, Marcus noticed. It was small and slightly crooked, decorated with paper ornaments and a single strand of lights. Under it were a few presents, including what looked like a handmade card. It was the most beautiful Christmas tree Marcus had ever seen, and he hadn't been there to see it lit up on Christmas Day. "Sit," Walter said, gesturing to the couch. Marcus sat. Walter took the armchair across from him. The silence stretched between them, heavy with everything unsaid. "Dad, Marcus began, but Walter held up a hand. "Before you say whatever you came here to say, I need to tell you something," Walter said. His voice was calm, measured. "I'm not the same man you turned away on Christmas Eve. That man was broken. He'd given up. He was ready to sit in the snow until he froze because he couldn't see a reason to keep going. But I'm not that man anymore. Dad, I'm so sorry." "Let me finish," Walter said, and there was steel in his voice now. "A stranger saved me that night, Marcus. A man who had every reason to walk past me, to protect himself and his daughter and what little he had. But he didn't. He brought me into his home. He gave me warmth and food and dignity. His 6-year-old daughter, who'd never met me before, asked me to be her grandpa. And I said yes. Because they wanted me, not a different version of me. Not a more successful or more sophisticated version, just me." The words landed like punches. Marcus felt each one. "So when you tell me you're sorry," Walter continued, "I need you to understand what you're apologizing for. You're not apologizing for one bad night. You're apologizing for years of making me feel like I wasn't good enough, for being ashamed of where you came from, for treating me like an embarrassment instead of a father who sacrificed everything so you could have opportunities I never did." A knock at the door interrupted them. Walter stood and answered it. Daniel and Emma came in, bringing cold air and laughter with them. Emma was wearing a pink coat and carrying a drawing. "Grandpa Walter," she announced, "I made you a picture of." She stopped mid-sentence when she saw Marcus. Her smile faded. She stepped closer to her father. "It's okay, sweetheart," Daniel said quietly. "This is Mr. Hayes' son, Marcus." Emma stared at Marcus with the unfiltered assessment of a child. "You're the mean one," she said. "The one who made Grandpa Walter cry." "Emma," Daniel said, gentle reproach in his voice. "But it's true," Emma insisted. She turned to Walter. "Is he here to be mean again?" "Because you can tell him to leave. This is your house." "Out of the mouths of babes," Walter said softly. "No, sweetheart, he's here to talk. Why don't you hang up your coat?" Daniel helped Emma with her coat, his movements careful and deliberate. When he turned to face Marcus, his expression was carefully neutral. "Mr. Hayes," he said. "Please call me Marcus," Marcus said, standing awkwardly. He felt like an intruder in his own father's home. I need to apologize. To both of you. To all of you." "Apologize for what exactly?" Daniel asked. His voice was quiet, but there was an edge to it. "For what I did. For turning my father away. For being cruel and selfish and—" Marcus faltered. The words felt inadequate. Daniel studied him for a long moment. "Your father spent his life giving you everything," he said finally. "He worked 2 jobs. He missed meals so you could have tutoring. He sacrificed his comfort, his happiness, his future so you could have yours. And you couldn't give him 2 hours. 2 hours at a table with people who might not have impressed your wife's family." The truth of it was crushing. Marcus felt his chest constrict. "I know," he whispered. "I know." "Do you?" Daniel pressed. "Because I've spent the last 3 days listening to your father talk about you, about how proud he is of your success, about how he doesn't blame you for wanting more than he had. He's been making excuses for you, Marcus. He's been trying to take responsibility for your choices. And that's not right. You're a grown man. You made a choice. You need to own it." Emma had been watching this exchange with wide eyes. Now she walked up to Marcus, tilting her head back to look up at him. "Why were you mean to Grandpa Walter?" she asked. "He's the best grandpa in the whole world. He makes apple pie and tells stories, and he helped Daddy and me when we didn't have anywhere to go. Why didn't you want him?" The question, asked with such honest confusion, broke something inside Marcus. He felt his eyes burn, his throat closed. "Because I was stupid," he managed. "Because I forgot what really matters." "What really matters?" Emma asked. "People," Marcus said. "The people who love you. The people who raised you and believed in you and never gave up on you even when you—" He couldn't finish. The tears came, hot and unstoppable, even when you gave up on them. He sank back onto the couch, his face in his hands, and sobbed. He cried for the years he'd wasted, for the shame he'd carried and projected onto the one person who deserved none of it, for the father he'd rejected and the man he'd become. He felt a small hand on his knee. He looked up through his tears to see Emma standing in front of him, her expression solemn. "It's okay to be sad," she said. "When you're sad, you have to tell people so they can help. That's what Grandpa Walter taught me." Marcus looked at his father. Walter's eyes were wet too. "I'm telling you now," Marcus said, his voice raw. "I'm so sorry, Dad. I'm sorry for being ashamed of you. I'm sorry for making you feel like you weren't enough when you were always more than enough. You were everything. You are everything. And I don't know how to fix what I broke." Walter was quiet for a long time. Daniel stood by the kitchen, giving them space but staying close to Emma. Finally, Walter spoke. "Marcus, I spent 23 years as a single father," he said. "I know how hard it is to raise a child alone, to try to give them everything while feeling like you're failing at everything. I thought I taught you the right values. Work hard, be grateful, treat people with dignity regardless of their station. But somewhere along the way, those lessons didn't stick. Or maybe I didn't reinforce them enough. Maybe I was so busy working I didn't see you drifting away from who I hoped you'd be." "Dad, that's not your fault," Marcus protested. "Let me finish," Walter said. He took a breath. "I was ashamed too, Marcus, when I saw what you'd become, when I watched you pull away from your roots, when you stopped inviting me to company events because I embarrassed you. I was ashamed, not of myself, of you. I was ashamed that I'd raised a son who measures a man's worth by his tax bracket, who values appearance over character, who would turn away his own father because he didn't fit an aesthetic." The words hit harder than any physical blow could have. Marcus felt them settle into his bones, the weight of his father's disappointment. "But," Walter continued, and his voice softened slightly, "I also know that people can change. I know because I changed. 3 days ago I was ready to die in the snow. Today, I'm sitting here with a family I didn't have before, with purpose I'd lost, with hope I thought was gone. If I can change, maybe you can too." "I want to," Marcus said desperately. "I want to be different. I want to be the son you deserved." "That's going to take time," Walter said, "and work, real work, not just apologies. You're going to have to figure out who you are when you strip away the mansion and the suits and the image. You're going to have to decide what kind of man you want to be." "Tell me how," Marcus pleaded. "Tell me what to do." Walter stood and walked to a small desk in the corner. He pulled out a pamphlet and handed it to Marcus. It was for the Riverside Community Center, advertising volunteer opportunities. "Start here," Walter said. "This is where I used to give talks about public service, about finding meaning in work that helps people. They need volunteers for their literacy program, their meal delivery service, their senior companionship program. Show up. Do the work. Learn what it means to give without expecting anything in return." Marcus took the pamphlet with trembling hands. "I will," he promised. "I'll do whatever it takes." 6 months later, Walter's apartment had become the center of a different kind of family. Daniel and Emma had moved into the building, into an apartment 3 doors down that Walter had helped them secure. Daniel was back in school, working toward his RN degree, his tuition paid by a scholarship Walter had quietly arranged. Emma had a new inhaler, new clothes that actually fit, and a grandpa who picked her up from school twice a week. And Marcus was there too, though not in the way he once would have imagined. He'd divorced Vivian. The process had been ugly and expensive, but in the end, he'd walked away from the mansion, the luxury cars, most of his material wealth. He'd downsized to a modest condo, taken a job with a smaller real estate firm that focused on affordable housing, and started spending his Tuesday and Thursday evenings at the Riverside Community Center. He taught financial literacy to families struggling with debt. He read to children whose parents worked night shifts. He delivered meals to homebound seniors, many of whom had once been delivered mail by his father. He learned their names, he heard their stories. He began to understand what his father had tried to teach him all along. That worth wasn't measured in dollars or square footage or designer labels. It was measured in the lives you touched and the kindness you showed and the way you made people feel seen. It was Christmas Eve again, and Walter's small apartment was full. Daniel was at the stove, stirring gravy under Walter's supervision. Emma was at the table, carefully setting out mismatched plates and folded paper napkins she'd decorated with hand-drawn snowflakes. And Marcus was at the sink, washing vegetables for the salad, his sleeves rolled up, his expensive watch gone, replaced with a simple timepiece he'd bought at a discount store. The tree in the corner was small and slightly crooked, just like last year's, decorated with Emma's paper ornaments and a few new additions, including one that Marcus had made, a construction paper circle with "I'm sorry" written in careful letters covered in glitter that Emma had insisted on adding. "Grandpa Walter," Emma called out, "can Marcus sit next to me at dinner? I want to tell him about my school play." "Of course, sweetheart," Walter said. He caught Marcus's eye across the room and gave him a small nod. It wasn't forgiveness, not completely. Walter had been clear about that. Trust, once broken, took time to rebuild. But it was acceptance. It was a chance. It was the door being opened instead of closed. They sat down to dinner together, the four of them, holding hands around the table. Marcus's hand in Emma's small one on his right, his father's weathered hand in his left. Walter said grace, thanking God for second chances and found families, and the journey that had brought them all together. When he finished, Emma squeezed Marcus's hand. "I'm glad you're here this year," she whispered. "Me too," Marcus whispered back, his voice thick. "Me too." The meal was simple: turkey and mashed potatoes and green beans and rolls. Apple pie for dessert, made from Margaret's recipe that Walter had taught to both Daniel and Marcus. It wasn't Instagram perfect. The turkey was a little dry. The gravy had lumps. The pie crust was uneven. It was perfect. After dinner, after Emma had fallen asleep on the couch with her head in Walter's lap, after Daniel had gone home to finish a paper for school, Marcus stayed to help clean up. He washed dishes while his father dried, working in comfortable silence. "Thank you," Marcus said quietly, "for giving me another chance, for not giving up on me even when I gave up on you." "You're my son," Walter said simply. "That doesn't change just because you lost your way for a while." His hands were steady on the dish towel, drying a plate Emma had decorated with marker earlier that week. "Besides, you're doing the work. That's what matters. Not where you started, where you're headed." Marcus set down the plate he was washing and turned to face his father. "I'm headed home," he said. "Right here. To this. To you. If you'll let me." Walter set down the dish towel and pulled his son into a hug, the first real embrace they'd shared in years. "I'll let you," he said. "Welcome home, Marcus." And there, in a tiny apartment in an ordinary building in a modest neighborhood, with paper snowflakes on the walls and a crooked tree in the corner, Marcus Hayes finally understood what his father had always known. Family isn't about blood or money or aesthetics or perfection. It's about who shows up when the snow falls and the door closes. It's about who sees you at your worst and loves you anyway. It's about washing dishes side by side and making crooked pies and knowing that you belong, exactly as you are, too old or too young or too poor or too broken. You belong because someone chose you, and you stayed because you chose them back. That's what family is. That's what it had always been. And Marcus finally was learning. So where in the world are you watching this story from? Drop a comment below and let us know, because your presence here means more than you realize. We're building a community of people who believe in second chances, in redemption, in the power of showing up even when it's hard. If this story touched your heart, if it reminded you that it's never too late to make things right, please consider subscribing. There are so many more stories waiting to be told, stories about ordinary people doing extraordinary things, about love that transforms and grace that heals. Thank you for spending your time with us today, for believing that stories matter, for being part of this journey. Until next time, remember this: nobody is too old to deserve love, and no one is too proud to learn it. Sometimes the greatest gift we can give is simply being there. Showing up, choosing connection over perfection. Stay brave, stay kind, and never forget that the best Christmas miracles aren't wrapped in expensive paper. They're wrapped in open doors and second chances and the courage to say, "I'm sorry." Until we meet again.